Yeah, as expected, Nigeria is in a recession. But there's lots more than a recession that is going on. Let's find out what it is. All right. Join me, guys. Hi, folks. Welcome again to the podcast. The way I see it. Again, just a podcast on how I see the economy, politics, the intersect. And this is an interesting week. The Nigerian Bureau of Statistics just came out with the most recent GDP figures. I think we knew this even before it came out that Nigeria was going to be in a recession, and which is more or less 2 quarters or 6 months of negative growth. And that's what they reported. So for quarter three 2020, Nigeria is at a minus 3.62 in terms of output. So more or less, we in the second quarter 2020, Nigeria was at minus 6. So that gives us 6 months of negative growth, which means officially Nigeria is in a recession, and a recession is 2 quarters of negative growth. That was expected. I mean, COVID is here. Commerce has dried up. And so, yes, it is expected that output, i.e., what manufacturers, what people consume, government spending, investment, exports, those components that make up GDP will have gone down. And they have gone down. So, yeah, that is clear enough. The problem is that what's causing the recession, in my mind, and of course backed up by data, is really crude oil prices. Crude oil prices. If you look at the last recession Nigeria had, which was in 2016, what you basically see is whenever crude oil output falls, which then reduces the amount of foreign exchange that flows back to Nigeria, then you see a recession. The recession is basically triggered in Nigeria's case by just a lack of spending. And that lack of spending is triggered by a lack of income, lack of forex coming into the economy that is then converted to naira that can then be spent as local salaries, local investments, and all that. So the recessions really have been really all about one thing: fall either in the price of crude oil or fall in the output of oil. And then that has reduced government expenditure, private sector investments, and all that. The thing is, all I've just said now, I could have said it in the 1970s or 1980s when we had the recession, and I'll still be correct. Nigeria's problem, really, in terms of the economy, is that the economy itself is diversified. So we have crude oil now contributing less than 10% of the entire economy. But crude oil is contributing almost 90% of the foreign exchange that Nigeria earns. And the way Nigeria operates is the foreign exchange is paid to the NNPC CBN account, and the Central Bank of Nigeria then takes the foreign exchange and converts it to local currency, the naira, and then distributes that local currency to the states and the federal government to spend. So clearly, once the crude oil sales fall, that has a direct impact on how much the state and the federal government can spend. And once the states and federal governments stop spending, that's no contracts being made. That's no discretionary spend on, say, buying equipment, supplies, or completing that road. So you don't have the money, you don't have velocity of money flowing through the economy, people ain't getting paid, and then it starts to kick back. So if I don't get paid, I don't buy the new car, I don't go for holiday, I don't eat out. Then the restaurants don't get customers, so the restaurants have to fire people. The people that get fired have little savings, so they can't spend. And then the economy just starts that vicious circle of there's no income, thus there's no spending, and once spending falls, trade, which is a very, very big sector in Nigeria, in the Nigerian GDP, starts to contract. Less food is bought, less people go out for entertainment. And you see, you just get that whole circle. If the government doesn't spend money, the economy starts to contract. That's basically the story. And that story has been with us in Nigeria since the 70s. Whenever we get an oil crash or a crash in output or a crash in prices, invariably Nigeria goes into a recession, or the quarter Nigeria economy contracts just for that quarter. Yeah, that's what's been going on. It hasn't changed. Doesn't mean we haven't tried to change it. I know when the former Minister of Finance, the coordinating minister of the economy, when she first came, the first time she was a minister in Nigeria, she did a lot. She did the excess crude reserve. She tried to, as it were, sterilize crude oil receipts. So what she was trying to do was, when oil money comes in, she didn't want the money going directly back into the economy in terms of spending. She wanted the money to go into an account where it's sterilized, it's cooled down in quote. Then it can be planned out and say, okay, how much do we have? Let's take a calculated withdrawal from these funds in the oil reserve, and then let's spend it. Unlike the previous practice whereby as money is spent, it's paid to the account and then it's just distributed and it's spent. The problem with Nigeria is that the constitution says that once funds are generated either through oil sales or through taxes, they have to be distributed and they have to be spent. There is no provision in the constitution to save money. So when Nigeria has, for instance, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, but that Sovereign Wealth Fund really, I would say this way, it's legal because it's passed by law and all that, but is it constitutional? Does it go against the principle of the constitution that says, hey, monies have got to be distributed to the Consolidated Revenue Fund and then shared out? That's the problem. We do not have a savings culture at the very, very top. We have the excess crude reserve or excess crude account. And what that is every year in the budget, Nigeria sets out a benchmark price. So if benchmark price is, say, $40 and crude oil is sold for, say, $50, Nigeria would use the benchmark price to receive funds from the oil sales into the budget, which means that extra $10, the difference between the benchmark and the actual selling price, that goes into the account, the excess crude account. So in effect, the idea is to save that excess, so it sits in the account, and then that excess can then be pulled or drawn down when there are gaps in funding in future years from oil reserves. That's what we have, the excess crude, and then we have the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is basically a fund where the Nigerian Federation, which is the federal and states, can take out monies and invest either in the infrastructure or the future fund, more or less like a sovereign wealth fund, the savings account for the entire federation. We have those two. But the linkage is that the excess crude is based on a benchmark price, which is set by legislators and the executive, and it can be drawn down any time. There's no mandate that has to be required for it to be drawn down. If the money is there, it can be spent. The sovereign wealth fund is more managed. It's got its own board, its own company, and all that. So that's a different. They say fund. The way they run it is a bit more professional. But the excess crude is just basically the executive can go in there and spend it. And what has happened is when oil prices go up, Nigeria's expenses go up. We pay salaries more, we begin to import more, and we do the production of, say, local food goes down because it's cheaper to simply just import rice than to have a paddy, mill the rice, to transport the rice and all that. It's just cheaper to just import it from Vietnam also. And that's what's going to happen in Nigeria since oil was found. Oil comes into the budget, it shocks the budget, it raises the incomes to an astronomical level. Then you see the Nigerians struggling. How can we spend all this money? So they increase salaries, they do white elephant projects like a steel plant in the middle of nowhere, and then suddenly oil prices go down. But the expenses don't go down, the expenses stay where they are. So when you repeat this cycle 2 or 3 times, you then have a federation that has a big bureaucracy, a federal bureaucracy, which is funded, literally, like I said, by crude oil reserves. And those salaries, those allowances, those pensions are basically just stuck there. And oil then has to basically rise to about 120, 130 a barrel for Nigerian federal government to balance the budget out. Let me give you a stat. All the crude oil that Nigeria sells, every single drop that Nigeria sells, goes to pay the salaries, allowances, pensions, and service-wide votes of only civil service workers. That's the civil service guys, the army, the police, and all that, just to pay them. The oil that Nigeria earns does not go to infrastructure. Maybe Nigeria borrows or Nigeria gets the money through income taxes from the corporations, but the crude oil reserves, that those funds are basically going to just pay salaries, pension allowances, service-wide votes of just the civil servants and all that. You can't run an economy or a nation like that where you have a resource where the price fluctuates, funding an expense where the cost is fixed. So salaries are fixed, oil prices are not fixed. So then what you have is that the month where oil prices go down, the government has to borrow to make up that difference. And this is where it brings us back to today. So right now, we have an output, quarter three, of 1.67 billion barrels per day. And that's the same output, more or less, with what you had in quarter three, 2016, 1.61 million barrels per day. And in 2016, with that same output, Nigeria went into a recession. In 2020, with that same output, Nigeria is in a recession. So it's clearly, once the output falls, we have less funds to come in. But what is more dangerous now is that the expenses have gone up and they do not come down. We've just implemented a new salary scale for the civil service workers. We have the academic staffing of ASU, of universities. They are called ASU. They are asking for an increase in funding. We have an insurgency that is taking the military. The military has to fund that to fund the fight against the insurgency. They're buying new aircraft. It costs money. We have an oil subsidy, or do we say a petroleum subsidy for local gasoline, where we subsidize that. Although the government is moving away from that, but we are still, I would say, we still have a bit of an interest there. There's power, which will have a multi-year tariff, which the government is also going to subsidize, like pay for meats and all that. So there's just a lot of subsidies, a lot of support that the federal government is trying to do in the economy, but just doesn't have the money. And crude oil is going down. Let me be clear. Normally, you have the crude oil price go down when there's a recession in Europe and Americas, and then it goes back up and everything is all good. Right now, we cannot guarantee that if crude oil prices go back up, that Nigeria's output would match the price. Why? Number one, Iran, with the election of Joe Biden, might be off the hook and they might start to produce again. So you might have Iran selling oil in the next year or so. That's the number one factor. Number two, oil, the Biden administration is going to go after renewables. So that's also going to be a drag on oil investments. Nigeria has still not passed the PIB, the Petroleum Industry Bill. So that's going to be a drag on the cost of Nigerian oil going out to the market. Number three, US itself is an exporter of oil. So they're going to go after the traditional Nigerian markets in Asia, also in Europe, to try to maybe sell crude to them. If they can't sell in the States, yeah, that would happen. So the point is, Nigeria is not guaranteed a market. Nigeria has got to struggle for the market. What that means is that Nigeria has got to sell crude oil. Our oil is one of the best in the world, low sulfur. We've got to sell that oil at a lower price just to guarantee that market. So if crude oil prices, if COVID goes away and everyone is selling crude oil, there's going to be a big competition with Saudi Arabia, Russia trying to outdo themselves. Nigeria has got to basically drop the price of crude oil to sell. What that then means is this, that the 1.67 million barrels per day that we have as 2020 quarter three, we cannot guarantee that we're going to go back to, say, the 2 million barrels that we had in quarter one 2020. And even if Nigeria did go back to 2 million barrels that we had in quarter one, at what price? So we could sell more, but at lower price, which then means that we come back to where we are today, in that we have a lower foreign exchange return coming back to the country. And remember what I said, the problem with recessions in Nigeria, what the causation of recession in Nigeria is lower crude oil prices. Once crude oil prices fall, then the revenues at Nigerian states and federal end fall. Once those revenues fall, investment spending also fall, and then that starts that cycle, and then we find ourselves back in a recession. So it's a problem. It's a problem for us. We have to try to fix it. I think there are many ways we can fix it. I mean, the solutions are already there. We literally have to go back to, I know we say this all the time, we really have got to diversify the sources of forex revenues for Nigeria. We just have to do it. The economy is already diversified, but we have to diversify how we get forex. And there are many ways. There's remittances, there's boosting agricultural cash crops, soybeans, sorghum. China wants that. We have to just do a concerted effort to mass produce sorghum, mass produce soybeans, and see if we can export that out. Argentina does tons of billions of dollars enjoy soy. We have to try to do something like that. But ultimately, we have to go back and control spending. We have to control how the forex comes in and how it is then spent. We have to really tighten the belt. We can't have presidential air fleets, nor can we have governors or commissioners driving expensive imported SUVs. That's really where it starts from. If we can control spending, then we give ourselves a chance that when we can diversify, they all move in the same direction to raise our foreign exchange reserves. Reserves are going to be raised by us cutting forex spending and by us increasing forex incomes. That's what we have to do. Otherwise, we might fall into what's called the Nigerian disease, where the government simply gets its monies, takes care of itself, and is then cut off from the rest of the people. And then there's no linkage between the government, taxes, and the people. And that is what we don't want. So just to summarize, yes, when a recession, yes, it's going to be bad. And yes, COVID will go and Nigeria will come out of the recession. But what is important for us is to recognize that recessions in Nigeria have been caused by crude oil prices falling or crude oil output falling. And the problem I see is that at this very, very low output, if COVID goes away, can Nigeria get our output back to get an income in forex back to where it was pre-COVID, so that that can support the reflating of Nigerian economy? It's not easy. It's difficult, but that's why we have very smart guys in government to take us out of it. So let's stop here. I'll let you guys ponder what we've talked about. Again, thank you for listening. Keep telling your friends about the Way I See It podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter. My handle is FinPlan Kalu Aja1. That's FinPlan Kalaja1. Do follow. Be a fan. We love and we support you guys. Okay, thank you. Have a good day. Bye.